Pat said, Pete, let's join the Navy. And I said, okay. And so the next day we went to Russellville, Arkansas, and to see the Navy recruiter. We walked in, and he said that he couldn't take us that week. He was going to be gone, but he could, you know, take us in the following week. We went across the hall and saw the Army recruiter, and he said, yeah, I can take you. And he said, I'll pick you up. I can pick you up tomorrow morning, bring you up and get you signed up, and you can go back home and visit with your family and tell them goodbye and your friends. And so we went up there the next morning and they got us all signed up. And I guess the last person that talked with us said, now you'll go into Fort Smith tonight and go out to Camp Chaffee tomorrow. And one of us said, well, what about our going back and telling our families goodbye, because we didn't have a telephone or anything. And he said, well, you can't go back home, you're in the Army. And we didn't get to go back home then until sometime later. And I spent, of course, the basic training in Camp Chaffee. Then I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma in the fall of 1949. After basic and after I went to Fort Sill, each morning we would go in for the briefing of the day, and one morning whoever was conducting the briefing or morning time asked us to, I'd already been told don't ever volunteer for anything, but I did this. The man said, is there anyone here who can type? And I raised my hand, and another guy raised his hand, and I went into what was called the battalion supply. It was my job to coordinate and take care of the paperwork, ordering things for the battalion. I did that until the following spring, and then I got orders to go to Okinawa. And when I arrived on Okinawa, I found out where my unit was, at which time I went and checked it out, and they told me that my unit was out in the field, and they said they would take me out there. They put me on this big truck. I was the only one in that whole big truck, and they took me out to this place where I jumped off the truck, just buried up in the mud. So they put me in supply there too, in the unit supply. And one day the first sergeant came over and told me that he had a load of gravel out there that he needed someone to unload. And I jumped up on that truck, and here this was in July, really hot. And he didn't come back out there for a long time, and I was getting hot. I mean, I was getting hot. And he saw me. He said, you better get down from there and take a break. And I did, of course. And I don't know how long it took me to, I don't know if I ever got any help unloading that truck or not. But anyway, I don't know whether it was the next day, but soon after that, we had a warrant officer who was the administrative officer in the unit. He came over shortly after that happened and asked me if I'd like to work for the first sergeant. And of course I thought I was supposed to do what they told me. So I went to work for the first sergeant, and later became the chief clerk in the unit. And he asked me one day if I ever thought about why he wanted me to work for him. I said, well, I probably did. You know, I was just there. And he said, you remember the time that I mentioned unloading the gravel? Of course I did remember. And he said, if I'd asked anybody else to unload a load of gravel, they said, Sergeant, that's not my job. And he said, you jumped right up there and did what I asked you to. I spent the rest of that year, the year over there, and got orders to come back to be discharged, I thought. And had my bags packed and everything, and the very day that I was supposed to go down and get on the ship to come back to be discharged, that same first sergeant came down there where I was. I lived in a tent for 21 months over there. And he came in and said, unpack your bags, you've been extended a year. And if you ever saw an 18-year-old cry, I bet you I cried. Anyway, I spent about 9 months of that year and came back and was discharged out of the Army. I started at the University of Arkansas, and I just wanted to go back in the service so badly. They had told me in the Air Force Reserve after I got out of the Army that they would call me back into the Air Force and give me my rank back. And about January then, I think it was, of 1953, I went down to see the Air Force guys. They said, yeah, we can take you back in. They caught up, so they sent me orders, and I went to Barksdale Air Force Base on my first assignment into the Air Force on the 27th of January, 1953. My main job at first was taking care of the commissioned officer records. Everything that pertained to a person's record, I did. You know, I would annotate the information that would go onto the record and so forth, cut orders if necessary and all that. Okay. And then later I went into personal affairs, in which we I did a lot of counseling on survivor benefits. We took care of the casualty work. If someone died in the Air Force or even a retiree, we visited them and assisted them in applying for their benefits. Then later on, I went to headquarters, Strategic Air Command, and was in the division up there that held that for all the Strategic Air Command bases. Well, I was a senior personnel officer, non-commissioned officer on my base. We didn't have our records down there. Our records were kept at another base. And we did the basic information for people. If they had a pay change or something, or a promotion or something like that, we would get the information to the place where our records were kept. And that was still personnel, of course. Mm-hmm. I worked directly for the base commander when I was at Mentui in Vietnam. But a couple of times I was the base career advisor, whereby people who were getting close to the end of their enlistment, it was my responsibility to either try to re-enlist them or discharge them, you know. And when we the Air Force came out with a program called Transition, where they could go into civilian life and you know, and have the same type work. And we did a survey on that and found that no one on our base had that, but I went to school for that. We were supposed to call them in and check their Air Force specialty and what their work consisted of and all, and then check to see whether or not they could perhaps get a job, you know, comparable to that in civilian life. But that first sergeant, he thought he was my second daddy, I think. He treated me mighty fine. I didn't even have to attend. I shouldn't say this on this, but I didn't even have to attend formations. I just go to work. One thing that happened during the time that I was in Vietnam, I got an R&R to Hawaii. Met my wife over there for a week. Since I was in personnel, I had access to the telephone where a lot of people maybe didn't. And I found out that they had this little resort out of town, about 12 miles. And I called them, and they said, yeah, they could set me up for that. And so I made a reservation for us for that week out there, you know. And I could walk out the back door of this little cabin and or right onto the beach. That was a good time. Contrary to what a lot of people say, it's hard, they say it's hard to get a job, but it was very easy for me. I started making applications for work. I had taken about 45 days leave at the end of my Air Force time, and I thought I'd need some time to, you know, to do that. But I left my assignment December the 15th, and about January 10th I started making applications, and I almost immediately got a job, and I had about 5 other places that I could have gone to work, so I didn't find a problem finding work at all.